Let's talk about the Mavs for a little bit, and let's talk about the nature and possible future of Luka Dončić and his injury status. Something that I was hoping the MRI results were going to be out today at some point. Maybe if I'm editing this tomorrow and the results are out, I'll splice in some information on it. Those of you watching this video probably already know, but Shams tweeted out that Luka is going to be reevaluated in a month. I was already operating under that assumption during this video, so it doesn't really change a whole lot of what I have to say. But it is kind of nice to at least have some form of timetable. You know, some guys were hoping for a 2 to 4 week injury. That I think was a little optimistic, especially the way it was just completely non-contact. I think a month reevaluation, add 2 weeks, 3 weeks on top of that, he gets back mid-February. I think that's a relatively realistic expectation. Maybe pushing it into March is pretty disappointing, but it is possible. I'm going to guess it's at least February. As far as caution goes with this sort of injury, it feels like Luka is one of those athletes that constantly has an injury, it feels like, and I wouldn't necessarily label him as injury prone per se, but he does carry a lot of injuries with him. In this case, it's not one you really want to play through. A calf strain, especially one that you had already strained early on in the season, actually in training camp, and missed all of preseason for it, was that left calf, and I think was mainly the reason why he looked so weird to begin the season. And he was also wearing a left calf compression sleeve last night when he did his injury, so it's kind of one of those things where the Mavs were monitoring it. He missed a little bit of time with his wrist injury, his right wrist sprain, but most people kind of had conspiracy theories about how that was just him getting his legs back under him. What I do want to talk about, and I promise this relates to it, Kevin Durant in 2019 in the finals tore his Achilles, something that he'd been dealing with before this injury for a long period of time was a right calf strain. Due to the nature of that calf strain, he ruptured his Achilles in the 2019 NBA Finals against the Raptors. Raptors go on to win that series. Obviously, KD becomes a net. You never know if he managed that injury a little bit differently if the Warriors would have gone on to win multiple championships. This is something we got to keep in mind with Luka Dončić. I understand we don't have a whole lot of information currently in this moment, but it feels like something you need to be cautious with. Obviously, I'm not a doctor yet, but what I will say is I just want to be cautious with this sort of thing. If you bring Luka back too quickly from this injury in January, late January, or early February, and he's not fully ready, he comes back and God forbid he does something even worse. We're not talking about an injury that just ends this season. We're talking about an injury that will go deep into the following season. Rupturing an Achilles, a year and a half, that is an immensely difficult thing to come back from. Kevin Durant has done it excellently, and it's very impressive how he came back from that injury, but I think a lot of people forget he ruptured his Achilles in that 2019 NBA Finals, and he didn't play his first full year for the Brooklyn Nets. He just sat on the sidelines because he literally could not play. There was no situation in which he was ever going to be allowed on the court that season. So we don't want this for Luka Dončić. So what do we do from here on out? And something I want to touch on before I move on from Luka's injury status is just, no, it's not his conditioning. Can we stop with this narrative that it's because he's fat? I don't think y'all understand how Luka's weight distribution works in the NBA. He puts on a lot of muscle, and therefore he can muscle dudes down in the post. He's not going to get rid of that muscle just to look a little bit skinnier so people will give him a little more credit. It's just not the case. That's not his body type. That's not how he plays basketball. This did not lead to this kind of injury. Kevin Durant is one of the skinniest players in the NBA, and he had this exact same injury over the exact same period of time. Can we stop playing like it's because Luka wasn't ready for the season? That is completely not the case. He had 3 months off this offseason. He did play games directly after the NBA Finals, after we lost for Slovenia, playing big minutes, but then he had pretty much a full 3 months off. I understand that he was still keeping up his conditioning, preparing for the season, but that wasn't the case the entire time. So I don't want to sit here and say oh, Luka needs to be in better shape. I don't think the reason he struggled at the beginning of the season was because he wasn't in shape. I think it was because of this left calf strain, which we knew was a problem in the preseason. And a lot of people just brushed it off, me included, as something that kept him out of the preseason. It wasn't going to be a big deal. Well, it is a big deal because he just re-injured it, and that could be, month, 2 months. You never really know with these sort of things. Last night I was talking about how it could be 6 to 8 weeks. That's totally possible. But anyway, who are you going to lean on in this next stretch of games, because I'm just going to read off the schedule we have over the next month. It's Suns today, technically when this video is released. It's Portland on Saturday in a back-to-back, and Portland just loves to shoot amazing against us every time. I understand that we blew them out by 30 last Monday. You know, you can't count young teams out like Portland who are athletic, especially against a Mavs team that doesn't have their best player. There are no gimme games other than the Jazz in the Western Conference. Then it's the Kings on Monday. Wednesday, it's Houston, the 2 seed. Then it's Cleveland, the best record in the NBA. Then it's Memphis, Lakers, Portland Trailblazers again, which I guess we're just going to knock all of our games out with them in the front half of the season, which is very strange. Then it's Denver back-to-back. Second of those games is on TNT. And then you've got New Orleans, another team that you can kind of take time off. I mean, I understand they have a lot of talent, but they're tanking at this point. Then it's OKC, Charlotte, Minnesota, OKC, Boston. That is your schedule pretty much all the way through January. You end January pretty easy. You got Washington, New Orleans, Detroit, teams you should take care of. But, you know, with the Mavs history and without having Luka, that 6-2 record that we have without Luka right now doesn't really mean anything to me as a fan, because it's easier to lock in and ask Najee Marshall to score 20 points in a night that Luka Dončić is not going to be there, but you know he's coming back in 2 days, 3 days, a week. You never know. Players are willing to step up and can step up for multiple games, but we're not asking them to do that for a month or 2 months. We're asking Najee Marshall now to probably come in and score 15 points a game. Every game, and he didn't have that last night, and he doesn't consistently have that. I understand he averages 11 points a game, and he's going to step into a bigger role, and there's multiple guys on this team that are going to step into bigger roles, but I don't think you can ask them to do that on a night in, night out basis. That was not how this team was designed. So you want to just keep the boat from sinking, right? You want to just stay at 500 during this stretch, stay 8 games over 500. That should keep you in the hunt for a playoff spot in theory, but with the Western Conference, the way the pace of these teams are winning at, it's very difficult to imagine a scenario in which Luka Dončić comes back and we're not, falling back to the 7th or 8th seed, just purely because we don't have the star power to compete with some of these upper level teams. Kyrie Irving is going to be asked to do a lot for this team while Luka Dončić is out. Kyrie is a guy that we've managed his minutes. We've rested him certain games this season. We're going to see number 1 option Kyrie, and I can tell you right now, he's going to be running hot some nights, which is what doctors refer to players that are just nearing injury or have a risk at which it's nervous for them to play, and he's going to sit some games, and we're going to have games without Kyrie Irving and without Luka Dončić in the stretch, and we just need to stay alive during those games. Klay Thompson is going to have to step up. PJ Washington is going to have to step up. Lively and Gafford are going to have to play better than they have been as a duo so far this season. Neither of them have been extraordinarily impressive. They have their nights, absolutely, but that doesn't mean that they've been great this season. And then you hope guys like Dante Exum are back early January. Quentin Grimes steps into a bigger role. He was excellent against the Clippers the other night. He had 20 points on 7 for 8 from the floor. I mean, that's incredible, but you're not going to get that every night. You're going to ask Spencer Dinwiddie to step into a bigger role, and last night he didn't really look ready for it. Some nights he does, some nights he doesn't, and that's the Dinwiddie experience at this point. But this is the example on why you bring him in instead of Dennis Smith Jr. at the beginning of the season, because he can act as a primary ball handler when Kyrie is off the floor and Luka's injured. He can come in, set up the offense, take some annoying shots sometimes, but make some tough ones. And that's just who Dinwiddie is. He thrives in this system because that we let him do what he wants to do, but you live and die by that when it's Spencer Dinwiddie playing big minutes. He's been great as a third guy in that lineup with Kyrie and Luka on the floor, but he does get hunted on defense just like Luka does, and for that reason, a lot of times you close with Klay or Najee lineups, and that's just the reality. Having 3 ball handlers on the floor is great, but without Luka on the floor, it's going to be Spencer Dinwiddie and Kyrie Irving running the show in the backcourt for the majority of the minutes. One of those guys is going to have the ball in their hands. And how much do you trust Spencer Dinwiddie in 2024, 2025? Probably every other night he's going to look great. And, in that scenario, you're only looking to stay 500. So, there are just some games on this list of games where it's just like, are we going to have enough? Like Phoenix tonight. Without Devin Booker, I think we have a chance. But, man, that's going to be a tough game. Every game is not going to be easy from here on out. And it worries me that we're going to enter the month of February and we're going to be still wondering when Luka Dončić is going to return to the floor. I'm not saying it's over. I'm just saying it's going to be much more difficult from here on out. And there's a situation I can imagine where even when Luka comes back and he doesn't look fully himself and we fall into the play-in spot. And that's an absolute nightmare, let alone falling further than that. But I don't even want to think about it. The Western Conference is just such a closely played conference that a 5-game skid here or a 3-game losing streak here, and all of a sudden it's like you've gone from the 4 seed to the 9 seed, and all of a sudden you're playing for the play-in. The Mavericks are currently the 4th seed. They are 5.5 games out of the 1st seed, but they are 3.5 games out of the 10th seed and 4 games out of the 11th seed, out of the play-in completely. 4 games out of the 11th seed. That's how dire this situation is and how precarious it can get for this team. If you go on a 3 or 4 game losing streak, you could be staring down the barrel of a play-in experience. And that is terrifying. So here's to hoping Luka Dončić is back soon. Here's to hoping that the Mavs manage it correctly and don't push him to come back earlier than he needs to, because while yes, our season hangs in the balance based on his injury, it is important that we don't rush him back and end up in a situation like Kevin Durant did in 2019. And front offices and coaching staffs and medical staffs have learned from that situation, learned from situations before it, situations after it, and hopefully they manage this well and Luka doesn't force himself back on the court earlier than he should. But here's to hoping that we can just stay 500 during this stretch. And I know we're 6-2 without him, but that doesn't really mean shit to me anymore. So yeah, dire times in the Mavericks fan base. Yeah, I'm nervous. Can you tell I'm nervous? I'm very nervous. Anyway, y'all take care. Have a good one.